Richard Lee, myself, of course, and from the Board of Directors, Greg White is the Chair, Vice Chair, Jim Hines, and Director for Events and Promotions, Jordan Myers. Just some housekeeping items before we get going. The webinar will be 60 minutes in length. Your mics are muted, but questions can be submitted by the chat box and will be answered towards the end of the webinar. And the webinar recording will be posted on the BC Athletics website. So it's, in addition to our staff, Andrew Cameron from Athletics Canada is here with us tonight, who will walk us through the process of waivers, release, citations, and other things that are up on Trackie now. So now I want to turn it over to Chris Winter, who will begin to walk us through the town hall tonight and the PowerPoint. Chris?
Hello, thanks everyone, or thanks Brian, and welcome everyone to the webinar. Hope everyone is doing well. I know I've connected with many of you over the last couple of weeks, and really appreciate everyone's patience. As we've worked through this, it's been quite the process to get to where we are today, but definitely it was an exciting step this week to get back to training. So again, yeah, just appreciate all your patience and look forward to taking the next few steps here. Just the agenda for today. I'll begin by just doing a quick run through on our return to training guidelines. As mentioned, Andrew Cameron is with us to provide a Trackie waiver demonstration, hopefully give us a little bit more, or all of our club registrars and participants, a little bit more information in terms of what's happening on Trackie and how to use it. I know some of you guys have already been in there and started using it already, so probably most people are already familiar, but for those that are having troubles or have yet to do it, I'll provide a little bit more information. Just checking my chat, make sure everyone's doing okay. Yep. And then there's been some submitted questions, so we will answer those, and then there's some time at the end for any other questions that are come up along the way. And as Brian mentioned, those can be submitted through the chat box, and Cliff in the background will be monitoring those. So that should be it. And moving forward, so just as an overview, as you guys are probably aware, BC Athletics has just worked really closely with both Athletics Canada and Via Sport to develop these return to training guidelines. We are fortunate to be a part of the task force at Athletics Canada, and in doing so, we were able to bring forward a lot of the guidelines and recommendations that we had put work into early on and presented to many of you at the town hall back in May. So I definitely have to appreciate, or have to say thank you to all the committees and the staff in the office, but also our committees, the track and field committee especially, for their work in helping in that process and getting, again, us to where we are today. So BC Athletics is going to be adopting the Athletics Canada Back on Track guidelines and following those. And then in addition, as all provinces are doing, we're all publishing our own returning to training addendum, which highlights any additional or differing guidelines that have been specifically set for the province of BC. So those guidelines have been published and circulated. You can find them on our website, the national ones as well, but they are also on Athletics Canada's website and have been shared through social media, on our newsletter, and on our website. So if you're having any issues, you haven't found them, you haven't seen them, feel free to reach out anytime, and I'm happy to send those over to you. Important to just have a bit of a disclaimer here that while we try to provide as much relevant and timely information as possible, as everyone's well aware, information around COVID seems to change at a moment's notice, and so it's always important to comply with the requirements of the provincial and local governments, any health officials, when it comes to anything to do with public gatherings and or sporting events. As I mentioned, the Athletics Canada Back on Track guidelines have been published. They've been out for a couple of weeks, and so hopefully most of you guys have had a chance to review those. I'm not going to go into any detail on those today. Hopefully that's okay with everyone, but large in part is that they were really based in a lot of BC Athletics original guidelines that were presented to you guys last month. So it would be a bit painstaking to go through all of those again, but hopefully you've had a chance to review those. And if you haven't, please go ahead and do that. There's a lot of good recommendations in there, and the different titles are on your screen right now. Obviously, all of it's important to read through. Specific event guidelines are provided, and then anything additional is in our addendum, and we'll go through that a little more closely now. So as I mentioned, we will be continuing to review and update these guidelines regularly as we receive guidance from the BC government, WorkSafe BC, and via Sport. And also it's important to remember that returning or resuming of sport activities might not be linear. We're hoping that we'll continue to move forward, but as a response to fluctuating numbers with COVID-19, there may be a case at some point where we have to take a step back or two. So it's important to show your patience and stay up to date with any of the public health official announcements, but any announcements also that come through BC Athletics and your clubs. It's also important to know that this document is just around training and practice right now. When it comes to competitions, those are currently being developed and will be released at a later phase. As you guys are probably well aware, we're currently in phase 2 of BC's restart plan, and it would only be in phase 3 where we're allowed to return to some sort of competitions, mostly regional, local competitions. Also important to anticipate a short lag time between the time that the government announces moving to a new phase and BC Athletics providing guidelines. There is always a process in that we actually don't necessarily know all of the ins and outs of what those guidelines are going to be when they come from government. And then so it takes time for us to update our documents and get those approved by the board and then circulate it out to membership. So we appreciate that everyone wants to get going as quickly as possible, but we also appreciate the patience as we work through the process. So in terms of the actual return to training guidelines, this week, as you guys probably are well aware, we were able to move forward with sending out waivers and being able to reactivate everyone's membership. So what was done was that everyone's membership, athletes, coaches, all the rest, were set to inactive through Trackie. And then if you were a club member, your club was sent a club attestation form, simply asking them to sign and complete that they're going to follow and adhere to BC Athletics and athletics guidelines. And as soon as they sign off on that, then every one of the members in the club will be automatically emailed a link to their individual waivers. If you're not a member of a club and you're an unattached member, that individual link would have already been emailed to you. Important to note that it's not coming from myself or BC Athletics. It's coming from Trackie and Athletics Canada. So just be aware that it may end up in your spam folder or junk folder. So if you haven't seen it and you think you should see it, be sure to have a look for that. We're also going to, in the next slide, actually, we'll go over to Andrew Cameron. We'll do a quick demo, and he'll show how registrars can go in and find the personalized link for each individual in case it goes missing and needs to be resent. That will be possible. So every member is going to be asked to complete the COVID-19 questionnaire that's done online through Trackie, and then either an informed consent and an assumption of a risk agreement. That's for participants under the age of majority, or the release of liability waiver of claims and indemnity agreement, and that's for participants over the age of majority. We're also asking all individuals to provide their email address, their home address, and their phone number. And that's simply to help facilitate any contact tracing that may need to occur in the event of an outbreak within your training group or your club. So next, we'll have Andrew Cameron provide a quick demo of Trackie, and hopefully that'll answer some questions. So Andrew, whenever you're ready, you can bring up your screen there.
Thank you very much, Chris. So many of you may have already received an email just indicating that your club needs to sign in and complete the attestation form. What I have on the screen is the form that you can see the first time you log in as your club. This form needs to be completed by your club before, as Chris mentioned, before the emails will go out to your members. As soon as your club completes this, those emails will automatically go out to all your members' email addresses with their individual links to complete their waiver. So I'm just going to quickly go through this and show you the main page. So the main page here, it's basically the same as what you would have regularly seen, except there's now this this warning beside any names that haven't completed the waiver. So this this indicator here will be on anybody that hasn't completed it. As soon as I just had completed the attestation for the club, I now have a new email that came in with the waiver for each of the individuals that I had entered into that club. So I'm just going to quickly go through the waiver and just complete this to show you what changes after this is completed. Oops. It'll just be a moment here. I just need to copy some information. So once this is all agreed to, if there's any information missing, there will be a warning that comes up, and that will need to be completed before this will go through. Once all the information is in correctly, the waiver can be submitted, and there'll be a confirmation that'll appear here, as well as an email sent to the member. So going back to the membership database, refreshing this screen, you'll now see that this member has completed the form, and it's no longer indicating that they need to complete it. This main member screen only shows if they've completed it or if they haven't completed it. What we've added in is the assumption of risk waiver section. This is where you can actually go in and see the forms that are completed, as well as get the individual links for any members if they didn't receive it by email or there was an issue receiving it. So in this section, you can see the same 3 members, and you can again see that this member has completed it. How you see extra information is just this little head and shoulders sort of profile here. Is you can actually click on this, and it'll give you the full waiver, which when you open it up, it can be printed, and it will just have the information showing that what was submitted on each section. This is well for members. So this member here doesn't have the check mark. They haven't completed it. Let's say they didn't get the email. In this section again, the waiver link is here. This link can be copied and then sent to the individual's email address through just regular communication. And then, yeah, once everybody has completed them, they will filter out and stop showing this warning within the main members panel. So the main members panel will show anybody that has completed it, but we're looking for extra information, including the completed waiver or a link to the waiver. That's through the assumption of risk waiver section. So I think that's a pretty sort of quick rundown of how it all works, but that goes over everything. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them now if there's time. Yeah.
And just worthy while we have you here, also important to point out that any new memberships will also be asked to sign through the waiver as well, and that's already up and running. And correct?
Yes, correct. So they will they'll sign up through the regular process, and what will happen is it'll trigger an email that will go to that member automatically during the sign up.
Great.
So it will. Yep, sir.
We do have a question just around exporting, and I think you and I have chatted about this in terms of being able to export and so you can, I guess, work within an Excel file who's registered, or sorry, who's signed the waiver and who hasn't.
Yeah, so we're working on the ability to sort of filter out by who's completed it versus who hasn't. We wanted to get this launched and through to everybody as quickly as possible, so that's sort of on our next to-do list. I don't suspect that's going to be very long. It just might be a few days.
Okay. We have another question here. Does each athlete have to fill out, example, if a family has 3 kids, do they have to fill out for each child?
So yes, because the forms are individual. The system will require, it'll send 3 different emails. What you note on the emails, even if they're sent to the same email address, you can see here, this email is addressed to Andrew W.S. Cameron, but then there's also Andrew C. Cameron, and just Andrew Cameron. So I have these all set up with my email address. So guardians would receive 3 different forms, which they would fill out individually for each of their children.
All right. I think that, there's another question. Is there an option to filter out who gets sent the original email, i.e. do not want to send to athletes who registered last fall for cross country but are not current members?
It's set to only go to current members when it's active.
Right. Yeah, should be anyone that's currently a member of BC Athletics.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. That's great. I don't see any other questions coming in, and if they do, we can try to address them later. But thank you for that, Andrew. That's great.
You're welcome.
So for Karen, there's no option to filter right now, no. Okay. Back over to me here. And where am I going here? So thanks for that, Andrew, and also do want to say thank you to both you and Adam Stacey. The amount of work you guys have put in over the last couple of days and weeks in terms of preparing for this. We know that this obviously wasn't just BC Athletics; it was all of the provinces that have been working through this. So we know that there's been a ton of work on your guys' end to make this as seamless as possible, and you know, it really has been. It's been great. It's worked out really smoothly. You know, just a couple small glitches, but for the vast majority, it's been absolutely seamless. So. Thank you for your work on that.
You're all very welcome.
So we're going to move forward. Just going to touch base back into our return to training guidelines here and talk a little bit about the requirements from clubs and training groups. So specifically, what we're asking is that all clubs or training groups appoint a health and safety officer. So this person, it's a fancy title. They don't need to be a doctor or a registered nurse or anything like that. If they are, that's all the more better. But this person is just really going to be the person that's on point to help oversee the implementation of these guidelines, anything to do with physical distancing or hygiene. Knowing that our coaches are obviously there to coach first and foremost and also to look after the athlete's safety, but they can't be at all places at all times. So having 1 or 2, in some cases it might be needed to have more than one to play that role of kind of just, I don't know, mother bear or something, just making sure that everyone's has the materials that they need, whether that's PPE or sanitization stuff, but then just monitoring the workouts to make sure everything's flowing smoothly. Probably the most important, obviously, in the early stages as we move forward into training and everyone comes familiar with how things will work out. So that is an important piece. And then all clubs are then asked to complete some of the following. One is a risk assessment. And now this isn't required by the club to submit to anybody, but it's a good step and a good tool for all clubs to go through, as it just helps them be aware of some of their gaps and some of their potential risks that they can then address either through our guidelines or going a step further and implementing some additional some guidelines. The club also must sign off on acknowledging that they've read the guidelines and understand their risk and are committed to implementing the recommendations. So this is that club attestation that's already gone out. And in many cases, a lot of the clubs have already completed that or are going to do so shortly. So that's underway. And then, as I mentioned, clubs may wish to go and add additional requirements, and many have, and they call that their own plan. But at the minimum, it's the BC Athletics and Athletics Canada guidelines. But we know that in some cases, whether it's the local health authority or facility, or perhaps just enhanced club measures, where clubs may want to go a couple steps further, just for their own context. We're asking that all clubs or training groups conduct daily symptom screenings for all athletes, coaches, officials, whoever's attending those training sessions should go through that. And there's a lot of different apps out there or documents. Here's an example of something. It's pretty rudimentary, but something that the coach or the health safety officer can manage, ideally from a phone or on a tablet of some sort. There's no need for printed papers and people to sign with pen and paper. Again, we're trying to reduce the number of utensils that are getting passed around. But in here, you can just see you would be placing the athletes' names that are at the training session, the date, the facility, and then just yes or no in terms of whether the athletes are feeling any of those symptoms. So hopefully it's a fairly quick, painless procedure. And and ideally nobody's showing up to practice in the first place. So hopefully this is just an extra step or measure. And then communication obviously is going to be big throughout all of this, communicating with your club members and or your facility users, just of any training restrictions, regulations, and recommendations. So hopefully that's already started and will continue throughout. The additional requirement is that through the BC RPA, which is the BC Recreation and Parks Association, through their guidelines, they have outlined that user groups of any rented municipal facilities are required to have a COVID-19 safety plan that clearly demonstrates how activities will be provided to align with the directives of the PHO and WorkSafe BC. So there's an example of this. We've had a couple questions, and it will come up later. Whether BC Athletics will provide a template for this. We haven't done that, only from the reason that Via Sport went and created that for us. So we didn't feel the need to go and duplicate the work that was already done. So this is in the Via Sport guidelines, just another set of guidelines. There's lots of them. You can find in Appendix G, and there's actually a fillable template, and that's what I've linked to here. And so you can see, you can work through this. Probably good to work through a committee or an individual, working through this and providing that to the club. But it just goes through and helps to address any of the potential risks and some of the protocols that you'll have in place. Now they say this needs to be posted. It's obviously going to be dependent on your facility. This is not something you need to provide to BC Athletics, but something you'll want to work more closely with your facility and municipal partners on that. If you have any questions, feel free to touch base anytime around that. But again, those resources, all of them are on our website, and you can access them there. In terms of some of the more kind of nitty-gritty guidelines, first one is obviously recommended that clubs or training groups meet with their members to present their return to sport plan, which in many cases will be the BC Athletics and Athletics Canada plan. But we do know that some clubs may go a step further and add some additional requirements based on their own context. Recommended to obviously do this through video conferencing rather than in person. And then we're obviously all athletes need to be at a minimum training members of the association, and that includes all athletes, coaches, officials, associates, anyone that's attending those training sessions. According to the PHO, all gatherings need to be limited to a maximum of 50 people and continue to use physical distancing and hygiene measures. And then what we're requiring is that individual groups be limited to 10. So that'd be one coach with 9 athletes. And just for clarity, that means a club may hold a training session and there may be 50 athletes, coaches, officials all there. But any one training group, for example, the throws group would be limited to 10. So in a track and field facility, you may have 10 throwers in one section, you may have 10 long jumpers, and you may have 10 sprinters spread out around the facility. And the reality is we just don't want to see, one coach and 50 athletes working out together, as we know it'll be very challenging to try to maintain any physical distancing or hygiene measures with that many of athletes. It's also obviously important to any of those maximum group sizes need to consider all of the people that are in attendance, and that includes parents or spectators. So probably at this time we're recommending that spectators definitely be limited, and just taking into consideration all of those numbers. And then it's also the size of the facility as well. Obviously a track is a large space, and that's good, but in some cases you may not be at a large venue, and you may need to go smaller than 50. It's also important to have personal protective equipment on hand and available, especially to coaches where their risk is higher and they're working with many athletes. And so having those on hand, especially when they were having to work one-on-one in a more closer context. Hopefully that's not the case when you're working at a large venue like a track. That you should be able to have that ample physical distancing space. But if there is a case where coaches and athletes are having to interact in closer quarters, they should be wearing those PPEs. Encouraging having signage within the facility and outside the facility, just to ensure that both the participants are aware of the expectations, but it's also good for communication with the community, especially those that are also using the facility in a shared manner. We know that early on there's probably going to be a lot of questions and concerns from the community. So getting out in front and having some signage there, just letting people know that there are training sessions on at certain times, and that people will be adhering to both the BC Athletics plan, but physical distancing and hygiene measures. Also important to remain community focused at this time. We're really encouraging people to stay within their own home community and home clubs where your participants are members, really avoiding any cross-regional, interprovincial, or cross-country travel. And then also during first aid, there was a requirement to put on a mask and gloves. And in our guidelines, we do have some links to a couple other resources where in the case of an accident where maybe you're attending to a non-responsive person, there's some additional information there where how you work around that in the case that where a mask isn't something that you should be wearing at that time. And then lastly is the Outbreak Action Plan. And this is really just if you are made aware of that somebody either has been contacted COVID or has symptoms of COVID, in terms of what steps will be taken to suspend training and ensure that the facility is notified and other members of your club or training group are notified. And then obviously the communication with the provincial health officers or your local health authority just to ensure that all the proper steps are taken. If there's additional information or contact needed, you can call 811, and obviously if it's an emergency, you can dial 911. So that's the plan there. We'll move into just some questions that were submitted earlier. And again, if you do have other questions, you can submit those through the chat and we'll try to work through those as well. See my little chat bubble going off. So I think there's a few coming in, but so these came in ahead of time. The question was, will we be drafting a safety plan template that clubs can use? I addressed that earlier. We did not go and do that because BS Sport has provided a template and a working document that you can work through. So hopefully that will suffice, but if you do have questions, you're always welcome to reach out and we can try to assist. How do these guidelines relate to private run clinics run through stores? The runners that sign up are not BC Athletics members and we're not a club registered with BC Athletics. So in that case, it's pretty straightforward where they do not need to adhere to BC Athletics or Athletics Canada guidelines. They would have more of a relationship with WorkSafe BC and following guidelines for those independent retailers. That being said, as they are running a run club, they're more than welcome and encouraged to follow BC Athletics and Athletics Canada's guidelines, as that would make a lot of sense. Can we host small local competitions? We're not quite there yet. Still in phase 2. That's from the government and BS Sport that competitions are not supposed to be a part of phase 2, no matter where you are in the province and how good or bad things are looking. So phase 3 is where small local regional competitions can be considered. So we're keeping an eye on that, and we know that could happen at any time. It was between June and September. There was anticipation that we could move to phase 3, but it was all highly dependent on the rates of COVID infection. So the answer now is currently we got to be patient and hold on to a little bit longer. You can definitely host mock meets within your club, but nothing that would be sanctioned at this point.
Chris, I think what I would add there is that our guidelines and recommendations are based on the provincial health organization. They're not based on the individual health authorities. And so they apply over the entire province. They're not just regulations for, say, Vancouver or Victoria. They're provincial regulations. Yep,
well, that's a good point. And I think those were the questions that were submitted ahead of time. So I think, Cliff, you've probably been collecting questions as they've come in, and feel free to address those. And yeah, thanks. Hopefully that was helpful for people to help clarify where things are at in the process now. We know there's been a lot of information provided, and there's a lot of changes as we've gone through this, but again, we appreciate your patience and look forward to getting back on track and running in the woods and all the rest.
One question was, do all coaches, officials, and other volunteers need to sign the waiver too? The answer to that is yes. All members of BC Athletics need to sign the waiver. Our club decided to cancel JD program and refund and cancel their club memberships. Does that mean that all those individuals are still considered club members according to BC Athletics? If their club signs off on the return to training guidelines, will those individuals still receive an automated email? Andrew?
I don't know that. Andrew still there, or maybe Sam?
Yeah. If they're still in the membership system and they have an active membership, they would receive an email. Just the way the system is designed, that would be automatic.
Okay. Are there any options for a club that always has trouble with the online registration?
I mean, I think that's probably, you should reach out to either Sam or myself, and we can work through that, because if you've been registered with BC Athletics and we have an email address, there shouldn't be any issues. But we should work on that on a one-to-one basis. So shoot either Sam or my email, and we can work through that and look at alternatives if that's the case.
Okay. The Rowing Canada risk assessment tool suggested a medical officer. Is this the same as the health safety officer, or do we need a legitimate medical officer as well?
Great question. And that's just different verbiage that's been tossed around. And so this, again, coming from the national document, rowing would have received similar guidelines that came from Own the Podium. So medical officer, health and safety officer, there's a lot of different names for it, but it's all the same thing. And no, it does not need to be a medical certified doctor or nurse. It just needs to be an individual that's managing just that process. So it's a fancy title.
If a coach wants or needs to train a small group at a different time from the rest of the club events, can the coach on site serve as the safety officer?
I mean, that's a club decision there. There's no requirements. We're not going to be asking clubs to provide us with a name and contact of who that is. And so it's just, it's good common sense here, following the guidelines. And in some cases, it might make sense for a club to have two. But a coach is obviously well equipped to handle this. It's more in the larger setting. So if it's a single training group of 10 athletes or 9 athletes and 1 coach, they do not need to have an additional safety officer there with them.
Do you anticipate a change to jumps, horizontal and vertical, to the use of sand and mats? Currently, AC is no. World Athletics has a different with cleaning procedures. Will there be changes?
Yeah, we're looking at this, and it's a challenging one because there's no way of knowing. I certainly don't know the ins and outs of how COVID is spread, and what we know is that it's spread through different materials. So sand could potentially spread it, and now how large of a risk that is unknown. So at this point, the recommendation has been to stick with run-throughs and work on drills and form, but not to actually do full jumps into the pit. But we're hoping that when and if we move to phase 3, that we could loosen that up a little bit. So we're still working through that, and we're getting information from beach volleyball and some of our other partners out there. And same when it comes to high jump and pole vault. That's something that, again, as we move into phase 3, we would look to hopefully loosen that a little bit as well. The other option there is something that we're looking at, is if there's an ability for our mats to be tarped of some sort and then used a cleaning spray. The challenge with the mats is that they're a porous material, and so to actually be able to clean those on a regular basis and have some confidence in that your cleaning is actually working is quite challenging. So we put this out to our membership as much as anything is with you guys on the ground. And if you have products or materials or ideas that you feel that may address some of these challenges, we would be more than happy to hear from you. And then we would share that information with the rest of the membership. So, at this stage, we're hoping to get back into training, and hopefully, for those jumpers, run-throughs and technical drills can be focused on initially, and then we would move into that later phase and be able to return to full jumps.
I guess really the key here too is that our guideline document is a living document, that it will change as we learn more and as we're able to get more answers on things. And as our medical people provide us more information on what we can do. It may come sooner than later. We just need to get more information on it. And we'll look at those World Athletics guidelines as well. Is there any possibility of holding summer camps?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the PHO order was for no overnight camps, but day camps are absolutely fine. Again, obviously following all of the recommendations and guidelines, but there wouldn't be an issue with that. Is
there a sample of a check-in document that you could post online?
yeah, all of that stuff's been a good time to just probably go and have a look at that so everyone's aware of where that is. I think everyone still sees my screen. So we've put up this button here, COVID-19 updates.
Wrong screen.
Yeah.
You're not seeing it?
No.
Oh, hold on. Okay, maybe I got to stop sharing and then share again. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we're on our homepage. There's the red button up here, COVID-19 updates. So this is our COVID-19 Central. And so this is where we'll be providing all of our updates. So these are our return to training documents. In here, you'll find our training addendum. We will update this. If there are updates, we'll make sure that that date is updated. Athletics Canada's, there's the risk assessment checklist, via sports sample safety plan. This information is all on Trackie. I think that was what you were looking for. Is that question? Does that answer that question?
Check-in document. So
Check-in document. Is that not? Yeah, isn't that it there? Oh, right here. Sorry, I can add that up there as well. But it is down. There's a bunch of additional resources here. So this is our sample athlete check-in document right here. Good.
And I've posted that link in the chat as well.
Okay, great.
I think that's all the questions. Just let me rescan through. If Greg or Brian wanted to go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to be sure that everyone understands that the membership type you need, if you're a coach, you need a coach membership. If you're an athlete, you're an athlete member. Official need to be an official member of BC Athletics. So while we indicate the minimum is a training membership, you've got to have a membership type that aligns with what you're doing, and so that you have a level of protection and insurance that's available. We are also waiting to hear back on the extension of liability insurance that is hopefully going to respond, if necessary, to cover off any legal fees if there is a claim against the association or member club, knowing that payouts under the provincial government order for any liability claims that are COVID-19 related are not able to go forward, but we may need at the same time to have legal advice and assistance to manage that process. So if we're ever challenged by anyone. So we're just stay tuned for that information. We are hopefully going to get that this week, confirmation that that can be in place.
Okay.
Hi, it's Greg.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a moment just to thank all the people who have come into the town hall today. It looks like it's close to 50 people. And I know there's a lot of work moving ahead for club administrators, for coaches, athletes, officials, volunteers, and family support members with helping the clubs get through this. And this is, it's not an easy process. It's quite detailed. I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen. And I think at the forefront is just the safety of our athletes is what we've really focused on. And so I just wanted to thank Brian and the team of Chris, Cliff, Sam, Sabrina, Richard, and Jennifer. And I know it's been a lot of work getting to this point, and I know people are very anxious to get back to training and whatever steps we may be able to move ahead to beyond that. So back to you, Chris.
Cliff, is there any other questions there?
Brian, there was the question that was submitted earlier regarding refunds.
And the question is?
I had emailed it to you, and it's one in one of the other 90 windows that I have open at the moment.
Okay. I'll look for that here.
Will refunds be considered or refunds for the difference made up between competitive memberships and training memberships, seeing as there will not be any competitions?
There will be no refunds as per the board's decision on June the 10th. There is the 25% credit discount for next year's 2021 memberships. And at this point, while we are not in a return to competition phase, we hope that can come about before the end of the summer. But we also have the fall for cross country, and then any other types of competition on the roads that can happen. But at this point, there are no refunds being provided for.
Can high jump mats be used if there is only one dedicated user on mats and over the weeks and months ahead?
Yeah, that's in the guidelines there. That you know, if it's just a single athlete using it, that can go ahead. And that obviously the issue here is shared equipment. So if it's not being shared, then there's no problem. And again, you know, we do look to our clubs if there's suitable tarps or anything like that can be placed over it, that can be then cleaned properly. We just ask clubs to present that to us, and we can provide sign off on that and approval for that use. And then we would share that with other clubs as well and make sure everyone's aware that there are other possibilities out there. So it's not that we're against it for any particular reason. It's just, you know, where we're at right now and the information we've received from the national body is that there's no such thing that currently works to ensure that proper hygiene is being taken. So, you know, challenge to the clubs and athletes out there to see what can be done, and would be more than happy to work with you guys on that.
I just got a long text. Yeah, the attendance at all events and all training and everything is very important, because if ever there is an infection, a contact, or anything, the contact tracers will really want that. And it is a component of WorkSafe BC. It's a component of every plan. So make sure you're taking account of who you're training with, when you're training with, and that coaches keep track of everyone that is involved.
Yep.
The second part of that is the ratio of 9-to-1. If you are working with younger athletes, you may want to increase that ratio just so that you can, as we know, younger people aren't as good at social distancing as they could be. It may require a little bit more supervision and guidance. And so, yes, you may need to increase that ratio for the younger age groups, or if you have groups that are unable to follow social distancing. Just remember, in all situations, we want to encourage social distancing. We're following the guidelines of the Provincial Health Organization. Whether you're out on a training run or, you know, with friends, avoid contact, stay 2 meters apart as well. I got another one. If a coach wants or needs to train a small group at a different time from the rest of the club group events, can the coach on site serve as the safety officer?
Yeah, I think we answered something similar, but yes.
Will masks be required when not actively running or throwing?
It's currently not. That's not been the requirement. That's if something comes from the PHO that we are now required to wear masks in public, then we will update that accordingly. But currently, if an athlete or coach or anyone else feels more comfortable wearing a mask, they're more than welcome to wear it. But there's no requirements to wear one.
I would say not required, but encouraged.
Yep.
Okay, if there's anything else, please submit now. Just let you know that we have been recording this presentation, and I'll do my very best to try and get it on the website first thing in the morning. It's a huge file when it's done, so we'll get there.
Yeah, and I think that probably concludes. You're always welcome to contact any of us, but good luck going forward, and feel free to reach out at any time with questions or anything we can do to help with you. But thank you very much for your time tonight.
Oh, I guess the only other thing I would add, Chris, is we're all want to get further in sport, and all of the staff at BC Athletics are working nonstop to move to the next step. Everything will always lag the government by a couple of weeks. The government announces that they're doing something, then a couple of weeks later, the regulations for that come out, and then it takes us a little bit to get plans signed off by institutions and insurance agents and everything. So we're always working on the next step. We'll get there, and we'll get there as soon as we're allowed to.
I want to make a comment about facilities. And we're here to assist the clubs if they're not able to work effectively with the owner of their facilities, or if they need additional information, please contact us. We'd also like to know when your facilities are open and available for training as well, so that we know where things are happening in the province. And if your local health authority and municipal facility owners or private facility owners are coming out with their own protocols, please send those along to us so we know what we're looking at within the province. BCRPA, we've encouraged them to have a site where all of the facility information can be put, but it doesn't seem to be resonating with them. So if you can send us what your situation is, that would be great. We can then look at putting that together and putting it up on our website under the COVID link on our website. So I want to just thank everybody again for being here tonight. Very much appreciated. Thank you for your patience, your understanding. We want your creative ideas as to how we can better move forward and around the jumps, horizontal and vertical. And if you have any other questions, please send them to Chris or myself or Cliff or Sam or Sabrina or Jen. We're all here to help. And if you have a high performance endurance athlete, send it to Richard. So thanks again, everybody. Much appreciated.
Good night.
Night.